Chapter 29. Black reached her target distance, cut her engines, and flipped before bringing the gravitics back online. She quickly decelerated, putting a little more into the burn than she otherwise would with a non-stasis passenger. Oakes's vitals spiked slightly, but quickly returned to nominal once the suit applied compression. In short, he was safe for now. The exo horde, still accelerating, didn't seem to understand what was about to happen, which was fine by Black. She didn't know if the things were sentient or not, but she knew they relied more on instinct and herd behavior than individual decisions. They might appear as though they swam through dark matter, but they'd have to either slow down to make the turn, or it would need to be incredibly wide. In both cases, the herd would waste time trying to follow, which is exactly what she wanted. As soon as her velocity hit relative zero, she warned Oakes, changed attitude, and eased the throttle open. The ship quickly accelerated, and her sensors lit up with thousands of signals heading toward her. She had altered her attitude to cut across the horde at a diagonal, not trying to avoid them completely, but doing her best to make them waste as much time as possible. Besides, she was also planning on doing something else. "Captain," Black said, "we will be in range in 3 minutes." Oakes spoke in a tight voice as he strained against the G-forces. "Shame. I'm enjoying this." "I'm sure," Black said. "Once I cut thrust, you'll have approximately 2 minutes to connect the barrel to the device and aim it out the cargo bay door."
2 minutes isn't much time, he said through a grimace.
"If we can't get it done, we'll attempt the same maneuver again, but I'll drag the horde further away."
"If that fails?"
"You get into stasis and we head back to Neptune." Oakes might have nodded if not for the G-forces.
"Shit plan. I like it."
Shit plan. She'd been hearing that phrase more and more since she became truly self-aware. Her crew had used it when they were faced with a less than desirable choice. Often the angst seemed forced because the party in question immediately knew the plan not only made sense but was the only option. Still, humans would rather have their preference, should one exist, and anything else was shit. Her humans were fascinating. "Please brace for multiple impacts," Black said, and activated the gravity bubble around Oakes. She wouldn't be able to maintain the protective shroud around him for long, but that didn't matter. As long as she kept his effective Gs below 10, she could crank up the engines. With her bow cannons firing a shot every 2 seconds, she increased her thrust to 30 Gs, the gravitic engines hardly ticking over to produce the speed. She shot through the darkness, the gravitic cannons continuing their steady, timed assault. The few creatures that managed to stray into the deadly path were immediately obliterated by the rounds. Stray exosolar creatures bounced off her hull or were incinerated by the engine's gravitic wash. In less than a dozen seconds, she'd gone completely through the horde, including the stragglers, hit another adjustment burn, and sprinted toward the rip. Even with her cams zoomed to maximum, she couldn't see the celestial anomaly, but she knew it was there. As they approached, the number of targets behind her grew while those in front were nearly non-existent. Her plan seemed to have worked. "Cutting thrust in a moment," she told Oakes.
"Copy," he said through gritted teeth. "I'll be ready."
Black calculated the time it would take the horde to reach them. She'd been about right, 2 minutes and 10 seconds. It was going to be tight. "Drop a mine," Black said. A gravitic mine dropped from her launcher, its thrusters immediately coming to life to slow its velocity. It wouldn't get anywhere near stationary before the horde hit, but it didn't need to. It would either take a few of them out or make them wary. Black preferred both. The EMR wave had diminished significantly, making her wonder if the portal had been damaged by Oakes's initial attacks. Simulations, however, proved it more likely that there were merely few creatures, if any, currently coming through. She and Oakes were going to have to fix that. Hopefully. Black counted down, and at 0, she idled the engines. The gravity bubble around Oakes disappeared, and he immediately demagged from the hull seam and walked to the large generator. While he moved the barrel to attach it, Black opened the cargo bay doors. She was somewhat surprised that Oakes didn't look out the hatch to ensure he wouldn't be attacked. Trust. She had already turned all the autocannons to cover the cargo bay approach. If a single exo became a threat, it would be shredded by both flechettes and gravitic weaponry. In theory. Everything was theory. The generator, the rip, how it all worked, all theory. Trust. Faith. Oakes was risking his life while putting together a device he didn't know would work to stop a threat he didn't know that could be stopped, yet he made no complaint or observation. He merely did what needed to be done. 90 seconds became 60. Oakes finished the connection, maglocked himself to the generator, and adjusted its position to point directly out the cargo bay door. 30 seconds. "Please return to the hull seam," she said. "I'll take care of activation." "Got it, Black." She noticed he'd unslung his rifle and held it expertly in one hand. Trust and faith apparently didn't override common sense. Before he reached the seam, the rip shimmered, only this time it appeared as though all of it were moving and writhing. A shadow appeared on the aft, and her autocannons destroyed the approaching starfish with 2 quick shots. Black had to wait 20 seconds before she fired the graviton generator. 20 seconds, and the rip continued dancing like doom. Another shadow appeared near the bow, melting out of the darkness before solidifying into something she'd never seen before. A large-headed creature, its jowls ringed with teeth, oval wings, for lack of a better term, and 7 thin, delicate-looking legs it unfolded as it approached. Black blasted it before it had a chance to land, the debris bouncing harmlessly off her hull. Something translucent moved through the rip. At first, she thought it was a number of KBOs, maybe 4 or 5 clusters of creatures. Instead, it just kept coming. A moment later, the thing, 2 or 3 kilometers long and half as wide, came through the rip and into the solar system. If Black were human, she would have screamed in surprise and terror. Instead, she sent the target coordinates to Oakes, and a missile immediately left her bay, followed by the words, "What the fuck is that?" She couldn't have said it better. The shimmering continued as if gathering itself, or maybe preparing itself was a better word, for something much larger to come through. Black activated the generator. Without pressurization, without atmosphere, and with the ship open to space, there was no sound as the generator came to life. The barrel, half a meter in diameter, lit up blue with a concentrated stream of gravitons. The beam hit the rip and the shimmering froze in place as if time stopped. The center of the rip changed in color similar to the Neptune Scar. Black put more power into the generator, practically redlining it. The missile hit the massive life form that had come through, the gravitic warhead exploding in a silent flash of blue and silver. Chitinous crumbs filled space, and a portion of the creature's starboard side appeared to be missing, but the thing continued off into the darkness. Black's autocannons tracked it, making sure that if it returned, it would receive a blast of flechettes. The beam continued cutting through the shimmer, bisecting it, trisecting, the barrel generator adjusting trajectory. Something else tried to come through, but met the beam and exploded into bright white light. Black's radar filled with targets. The horde was coming. The gravitic mine Oakes had dropped 1,000 kilometers away detonated in a nearly indiscernible blink of light. At this rate, the creatures would be on them in seconds. She cut one more long slash through the rip before smoothly accelerating, her rear cams focused on the tear in space. It now looked like a sieve of alternating darkness, gray, and shimmers. The graviton generator had done significant damage to the rip, even closed it in places, but she'd needed more time, and maybe another pass or two. Oakes dropped a mine behind them, waited a few seconds, and dropped another. He'd seen on the radar what she had. The creatures no longer merely pursued. They were trying to cut her off. A sortie of the horde hadn't bothered to follow her to the rip. Instead, they'd flocked in space, waiting for her to try and escape. They were essentially between her and Neptune, hundreds of them. Another object appeared on radar, a massive thing several times the size of herself. A quick scan told her it was a KBO 2 kilometers in diameter. She didn't know if it was a cluster or some new thing they hadn't seen before. Regardless, it was moving to intercept her, and at a speed she didn't think was possible. She adjusted the ship's course, and the massive thing matched it. Black mentally said the word "fuck," and immediately felt both amused and horrified. After apologizing to Oakes and once again forming a gravity bubble around him, she cranked up the engines to 13 Gs. The bubble would last for some time, but without him leaving the bubble and removing the grav generator's barrel, she couldn't close the cargo bay. She was open to space. Black accelerated to 16 Gs without warning Oakes, remembering how much damage she'd done to Dunn when she had to push to 30. Even a gravity bubble couldn't protect a human from that for long. She held the incredible speed for 10 seconds, just long enough to give herself enough of a head start. She cut the engines and connected to Oakes. "Captain, traveling at this speed with an open cargo bay is a serious hazard considering the EMR levels. I fear the cargo bay will become irradiated if we don't disassemble the generator." Oakes shook his head groggily.
No. If we do that, we can't use it again.
Not without reassembling, she said. I'm far more concerned about your safety at the moment. Please demag and remove the barrel. Through his visor, she saw Oakes open his mouth to argue, but in the end, he said nothing. With a sigh, he demagged from the hull seam and headed into the cargo bay. Half a beat later, her radar filled with new targets. These were coming from the inner Kuiper. How long had they been coming through? How many were there? And how widespread were they? One thing was for sure. Heading back to the Rip by herself would all but ensure her destruction and Oakes' death. The EMR was still affecting radio signals. In short, she was the only warning Trident Station would get. Please hurry, Captain, Black said softly. Oakes managed to break down the barrel just enough for her to close the cargo bay. The EMR intensity immediately departed the ship's interior, and she would have sighed in relief if she were human. Please return to the seam, she said as she slowly accelerated. Oakes stepped away from the barrel and headed back to his refuge.
We going back?
No, Black said. We're not.
What if I order you? Oakes asked.
Black thought about that for a moment. I'll resign before I take you back there, she said. Oakes clamped himself to the bulkhead.
You're that serious?
I am, Captain.
Shit.
He dropped his eyes to the deck.
What the void are we going to do?
Get help, she said, as much as we can. With that, she accelerated to 6 Gs, counting off the minutes to when she could get him into stasis and open up the throttle. Chapter 30. Dunn didn't like what he was seeing. The shipyard's queue had continued pushing off new requests while it seemed to be manufacturing the same thing over and over again. Hundreds of slightly misshapen orbs floated near the docks, and every few minutes another pair appeared. Gunny was going through the supplies the collective had sent at a dizzying pace. Something else was printing inside there, but Dunn had no idea what it could be. The trio hadn't relayed any messages, meaning Dunn had to decide for himself what was going on. Black hadn't radioed in. The transmission feed from the outer Kuiper belt had ceased after a large bluish-white wave washed over it. In short, he thought Black was in trouble, and so was Trident Station. Something is coming, he said to himself. A lot of somethings. Fortunas, I need Talby and Kalimura here immediately. Yes, Commander, the SE said. He continued watching the holodisplays view of the shipyards and its growing number of progeny. What are you doing, Cartwright? Dunn asked no one. As if in response, a dozen of the orbs floated away from the docks until they reached a distance of 1 kilometer. They then disappeared in a flash of acceleration. You sending help or making fortifications? He asked aloud again. The door of his ready room buzzed. Come in, he said softly, and heard the hatch open. He didn't have to turn to know it was Talby. He'd almost always be the nearest unless he was flying. Yes, sir? Talby asked. Take a seat. The XO walked in front of the display and eyed the empty seat next to him. Bit lonely in here, Talby said. Got that right. Kalimura appeared at the hatch and Dunn smiled. Not so lonely now. Come in, Lieutenant, and close the hatch. She complied and stood waiting for instructions. Dunn wanted to tell her at ease, but knew it wouldn't do any damn good. Take a seat, he said to her. She sat next to Talby, giving him a respectful nod, which the XO returned. We have a new problem, he said. Black has been out of radio contact for well over 2 hours her local time, and the shipyards has been churning out what looks like mobile turrets or missile platforms. Kalimura and Talby traded an uneasy glance, and Dunn nodded in response. It took Black less than 24 hours to get there, he said. We know the XOs can't travel that fast, or at least we think we know that. He let the statement hang for a moment. Regardless, until we hear from Black, we need to operate under the assumption we're going to be attacked within the next 20 shifts. 20 shifts? Talby asked. Not much time. No, Dunn agreed. I said that's the assumption. Once we hear from Black, we'll have a better idea of the situation. Or the shipyards could share what they know, the XO muttered. Can't we just ask? Ask whom? Dunn said. I can ask G, but he'll speak in riddles. I can ask the collective, but they won't respond. I can ask Reed, but he doesn't know shit, and I can't ask the trio because they say they don't know. He shook his head in frustration. We're flying blind here, and that's all the more reason to act as though this is an impending threat. Aye, sir, Kalimura said. Major, we'll have to argue about who's going in the SVs and who's going in the skiffs.
No argument, Talby said. You know who's better than whom.
Well, she said, I need you in an SV, obviously, along with Lowell. We don't have enough Marines to go around for gunners.
Talby gave her a knowing grin.
Try asking Lowell about that? I'll see what he can do, Callie said.
Dunn didn't quite understand what they were talking about and didn't care. They might have a lead on a few more instant resources, and that's exactly what he needed to hear. What else do you need, Lieutenant?
Every Marine that fought at the Battle of the Scar, apart from critical logistical personnel, of course.
Dunn thought she meant Noble, the chief engineer. Of all of Black Company, he was probably even more important than Dunn himself. Maybe he could help in his own way by coordinating with the trio. I'll get with the trio, Dunn said. Make a plan for defense.
Sir, Kelly said, if we don't have to worry about the Scar at the moment, we can move the sensor net to survey Trident Station instead.
Interesting suggestion. Rather than coercing the shipyards to churn out more sensor nets, they could just retask what they already had. Only problem with that was that it rendered them effectively deaf, dumb, and relatively blind when it came to the Scar. If it started doing something other than present a colorful light show they could see, they'd have no warning. No, he said. We leave those where they are. However, we can reorient some of our proximity nets. Make sure that we don't get flanked. Talby sighed. New recruits arrive in a week. If we had 2 more weeks, we'd be in better shape. If we had a year, we wouldn't be in good enough shape, Dunn said dryly. Can't be in good shape for the unknown. Maybe, Talby said. I'm just grousing, sir. Instead of doing that, maybe you should come up with a comprehensive defense plan. Talby sighed. We have one, sir. It just calls for about 40 more Marines. Dunn narrowed his eyes. Yes, Commander. Callie Mora and I will come up with a plan. Good, Dunn said. I don't want to alert the entire station that we are expecting company. Not yet. I want to give Black another 3 shifts to report in. Regardless, we need intensive training, and I mean now. Callie Mora said, If I may steal Copenhagen, she's yours, Talby said. Anyone else I possibly have command over is, too. It may come to that, Dunn said. Put your heads together and give me a plan by the end of the shift. Aye, sir, the pair said in response. Dismissed, Dunn said. After the pair left, Dunn mentally prepared himself and said, Portunes, we need to talk. Yes, Commander. Will you tell me what's going on? He'd learned a long time ago not to ask, can you? Too much lexical ambiguity for SEs to play silly games with. What we know is that the radio transmission was interrupted. We haven't heard from Black, and the shipyards is adding to its growing inventory of what we believe are mobile gravitic turrets. Another 20 just engaged their drives and are presently heading deeper into the Kuiper. Gunny's sending out an interceptor sortie, Dunn said. Is he scouting or preparing for an invasion? Did I miss any other possibilities? Apart from the 0.01% chance that he has suffered some kind of psychosis, the only other answer is that he has been compelled either by the collective or external phenomenon. Like Xi? Dunn offered. Yes, Commander, that is a possibility. How many of our turrets are automated? All are automated, Commander, Portunes said. All can be manually fired as well. Dunn was already beginning to piece together a plan. Some of the station's denizens wouldn't care for it much, but he'd explained that it was the price of living here, whether you wanted to be here or not. Apart from that, however, and making another general call for volunteer Marines, there wasn't much else he could do. A week or 2 from now, the combat bay would be filled with Green Marines getting their asses chewed and put through the IDOC paces. For now, he had what he had. Just like Talby and Kalimura. You couldn't fabricate resources, only discover them. Can we retask the satellite sensor net? Yes, Commander, we can push it further out, but it will reduce our visibility of the immediate area by more than 40%. More than I expected, Dunn said, and stared down at the table. He had hoped it would be more like 20%. Once the Exos crossed the detection line, Trident would have no idea where the creatures had gone. Radar would be useless unless enough of the creatures clustered. That would make things more difficult. On top of that, the behemoth Exos that had tried to destroy Trident had carried with them their own kind of EMR interference. They warped the space around them, affected radio, radar, and possibly weapons. Was that why Black hadn't checked in? Had she and Oaks flown into a hornet's nest of EMR and Exos? They'd been preparing, he thought.
While we licked our wounds and rebuilt, they were preparing for an all-out invasion. Shit. They might not be able to come through the scar, but there was nothing keeping them from coming through the rip the artifact had made. Not until humanity closed it, that was. The shipyards just launched 126 turrets. Dunn blinked at the number. Where is he sending them? The turrets are spreading apart as they accelerate. He's shotgunning, Dunn said. If you mean praying for a hit, I believe you are correct. Woefully inefficient. Do you have a better idea? How else are you going to know if something enters the vicinity? The effective fire range of the turrets can't be more than 1 kilometer at best. Yes, but they might have sensors that see much further, Dunn said. Portunus sounded amused. That is correct, Commander. I hadn't considered that as a strong possibility. Dunn shrugged. It's what I would do. In fact, I'd be sending out another 100, spread them further apart, and send them deeper into the Kuiper. Depending on their range, of course. Of course, Portunus said. We assume that many of the turrets will be parked in an orbit around both the shipyards and Trident. Makes sense, Dunn sighed. There wasn't much else he could do apart from coordinate station duties and make sure he had all the on-shift personnel accounted for. Normally a job for the XO. Dunn couldn't wait to fill out the ranks. Lowell and Talby were the only combat-experienced pilots. Copenhaver, her only experienced gunner. With Elliot, Murdoch, Rana, and Dickerson on their way to Proxima, she had almost nothing in the tank. She'd have tapped the commander for an SV null if she wasn't afraid of being slapped down for the idea. Besides, the commander needed to be here to deal with the trio and any other nightmares they had to worry about. She stood in Dickerson's office waiting for Wint and Lowell to show up. After hearing Wint's report on Lowell's accuracy tests, she could tell the Marine had already imprinted on the older man. Funny that. She'd essentially fought beside Wint and still barely knew him. That was the case with most of her Marines apart from Dickerson and Elliot. That was something she needed to fix. When in the void was she supposed to get the time? Every moment she wasn't planning, strategizing, and learning her job, she'd been in the SV null learning how to fly and not crash into the station. On top of that, she and everyone else were on an all-shift alert cycle. Every member of the Trident Station crew was expected to be at their stations at the slightest issue. That had resulted in more than a few interruptions during shifts 2 and 3. Poor bastards never got a peaceful dinner or a restful sleep. She should know, being on shift 2. The wear and tear on the mind and spirit was nothing short of demoralizing. She didn't feel like there were any wins on the board and that everyone else felt the same way. Now that the scar had awakened, it was even worse. If you could see a threat with your own eyes, spot it on a sensor, know its location, or even know it was in your space, you could do something about it. You could make friends with that adrenaline surge, your body tuning up for fight and flight and die, and be sharper than a vibroblade's monomolecular edge. But when the threat was nebulous or might not even exist, and you were expected to be on call your entire life, unable to relax but for a few hours at most while worrying if you had enough defenses, enough know-how, enough expertise left to fight another battle of the scar, and knowing you didn't. She filled in 2 names on the empty roster, Osorio and Kushia. The pair had essentially joined up that morning. Both were weathered, grizzled, and veterans of the satellite war. When Dunn had offered SFN personnel and contractors the chance to muster out, they'd taken it just like Lowell. Unless Kali was mistaken, many of them looked up to the old pilot, making her wonder if he'd led them through the terrifying days at Trident Station before S&R Black arrived to clear away some of the monsters. Before the big monsters had shown up. If she was lucky, she could find more retirees willing to don combat suits, get yelled at, and risk their lives for their home that was really in exile. Maybe in time, more would realize that regardless of why they were here, this was the only place in the solar system that would have them, and that they had a vested interest in its protection. Maybe the scar was that beacon or sign of change. Kelly yawned loudly and reached for her mag mug. Empty. She left the hollow interface and walked out into the combat bay. She immediately spied Wint and Lowell, their combat suits shining as if freshly printed, talking to both Kuchia and Osorio. The men had apparently not bothered to wait until tomorrow. Good. Maybe Wint could get a jump on getting them fitted and ready. 4 more, she said to herself. But really, she needed more than just 4. She needed another pilot, if possible, and a gunner for each SV. Pilots, although rare, were easy to recruit.
She'd never met one that couldn't wait to get inside an SV and fly it until it ran out of fuel. Gunners? Those were not only rare, but they had absolutely no reason to come back. Unless they liked vertigo, trusting another human being with their lives, and firing weapons, that was. When Osorio and Cuccia met her gaze, the two men snapped to attention and saluted her. Lowell and Wint followed suit. She returned it, told them at ease, and headed to the combat bay's break room while stifling another yawn. She'd get something else to keep her awake, but the sight of the two new recruits had already left her feeling more alert. Maybe even hopeful.